Breaking news from the Bronx tonight, where federal authorities have launched a sweeping RICO case, the alleged leader of the criminal enterprise.
In federal courtrooms across the United States, some cases are built around a single crime. But when prosecutors invoke the Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, they're telling a different story. OMEN Kells kept a photograph in the bottom drawer of his desk, tucked beneath a legal dictionary he hadn't opened in 4 years. The photograph was from 2009, a block in East Harlem on a Tuesday morning in October. A woman named Patricia Reyes, standing in front of the building where her son had been shot 3 days earlier. She wasn't crying in the photograph. She'd already done that. She was looking directly at the camera. At the time, OMEN was 26, first year in the office. He wasn't the prosecutor on the case and wouldn't become one. The shooter took a plea before indictment. 7 years, out in 5. Patricia Reyes had sat in the back of the courtroom for the plea hearing and said nothing. The process hadn't asked her for participation. He watched her leave. This is the machine, he thought. Learn how it works or become irrelevant to it. He spent 15 years learning how it worked. The photograph reminded him of why he started. On the days when the case felt like it was breaking down, which it did more and more, he would open the drawer and look at Patricia Reyes and remember that it was built on top of something real. He told himself that often enough that he really had to check whether he still believed it. The morning after Sin's profit session, OMEN arrived at the office at 7. He made coffee in the small kitchen at the end of the hall. He drank it black, looking out the window at the street. He was thinking about the word, consulted. Sin had placed Quell at the center of the June 18 decision without assigning him the active verb. She had been precise in a way that suggested she decided, before she entered the room, exactly how much she was willing to give and where the line was. Consulted. Still worked legally. Knowledge plus proximity to a decision that resulted in a death and furtherance of enterprise activity was enough for the murder and aid of racketeering count. The verb didn't have to be ordered. It didn't have to be directed. It had to be established that Quell was inside the decision, that his weight shaped the outcome. Consulted established that. But it was softer than he had hoped for. And soft words had a way of becoming softer under cross-examination in front of 12 people who'd been told beyond reasonable doubt was the standard. The defense would sand that word down until it was dust, until consulted sounded like a phone call between acquaintances and not a man authorizing violence. He poured more coffee. The deeper question was whether she would testify or whether her proffer value lived only in intelligence, information that let him build the case through her other channels without putting her on the stand. Putting her on the stand meant cross-examination. Cross-examination meant Quell's attorney asking her about her own exposure, her own deal, and consideration she received for the words she carefully chose. You used the word consulted, not ordered, not directed, not authorized. Consulted. Isn't it possible that a man being informed of a situation is not the same as a man deciding its outcome? She would handle it. Sin Carter was the kind of witness who sharpened under pressure rather than frayed. Juries sometimes read that as credibility and sometimes read it as calculation. And there was no predicting which direction 12 strangers would break. Belief was not certainty, and certainty was what he needed. He carried his coffee back to his office and sat down. Opened the Quell file. Read his own indictment language. Authorized response to encroachment on QV Enterprise territory, resulting in the death of Malik Denton. He had chosen authorized deliberately. It was the word that turned a phone call into a command structure, a man into a decision maker, whose decisions had permanent consequences. He had written it at midnight on a yellow legal pad after 3 hours of reviewing the wire intercepts. And when he wrote it, he had felt the satisfaction of finding the precise word for a precise concept. He still believed it was the right word. He understood now, in a way he hadn't at midnight, that believing something and proving it to 12 people were two separate jobs. The distance between them was where the trials were lost. Kane Ma appeared in his doorway at 8:15 holding a cup of coffee. He sat in a chair across from the desk without being invited. That meant the conversation wasn't going to be brief. Carter's proffer, he said. I know. She gave us consulted. I know. That's not the same as authorized. It's not inconsistent with authorized. It's not confirmatory of it either. Kane set his coffee down. We have Mercer saying RICO made calls on territory disputes. We have Carter saying he was consulted on this specific incident. We have wire intercepts that put his phone in contact with two people at the location that night. That's a chain. Circumstantial chains convict people every day. I know they do. He paused. I also know what it looks like when a chain has a weak link and we decide to believe it holds. OMEN looked at him. This was the conversation they'd been moving toward for weeks. Kane circling it, his prior case, the exoneration, the cooperator whose testimony had been genuine perception rather than fabrication, a jury that believed it because it cohered. Cohesion wasn't truth. Kane had learned that at cost. He hadn't let OMEN forget it was a lesson available to be learned. Say it, OMEN said. Kane leaned forward. I'm not arguing Quell isn't culpable. I think he is. I think he ran something that became more than he intended, which is how most of these cases work. But if the murder count doesn't hold at trial, it damages everything adjacent to it. The jury starts asking what else we overstated. We didn't overstate anything. Authorized is our word, not his. He said handle it. Those are two different sentences with two different legal implications, and we need to be honest about the gap. OMEN looked at the window. He wasn't angry. Kane wasn't undermining the prosecution. Kane was doing what Kane had always done, locating the load-bearing points and pressing on them to find the ones that flexed. That wasn't disloyalty. That was the work. But there was something else underneath the work. Something OMEN recognized in himself when he was being honest about it. The gap Kane described was real. Authorized and handle it were not the same sentence. He had built an argument for why they were functionally equivalent, and the argument was legally sound. And the argument was also a bridge he constructed between what he had and what he needed. Bridges held, or they didn't. What do you want? OMEN asked. Something harder than consulting. Something that doesn't close the distance between our argument and what we can actually prove at trial. That means another cooperator, or the phone gives us more than we pulled. The cell tower data from that night still has unresolved contacts. 3 numbers that ping within a quarter mile of the location that we haven't fully traced. OMEN nodded once. Pull them. Kane picked up his coffee. Already did, he said. This morning. He left. OMEN sat alone with his legal pad. He looked at the word authorized in his own handwriting. He didn't change it. He felt the gap for the first time, and the years of a man's life it contained. The grand jury room was on the 3rd floor. 12 citizens in a room listening to testimony that only the government presented. OMEN stood before them, presented the case the way he learned to present. A series of established facts arranged in logical sequence, each one footnoted evidence, each one building until the conclusion felt like recognition rather than argument. He'd done this 41 times. He was good at it, the way surgeons were good at surgery, through repetition and the gradual refinement of pressure. Today, the financial architecture. 3 years of transfers, $412,000. The pandemic loan application, the shell entities, the analyst map showing money moving outward from certain accounts and returning through others. A circulation system for funds that needed to travel without leaving legible tracks. He watched their faces. Most grand jurors arrive with a disposition toward the government. They've been summoned by the government. They were hearing only what the government chose to present. That asymmetry was the design of the process, and the design wasn't neutral. OMEN had always known this. He'd made peace with it by believing the cases he brought were true, that the gap between the process and justice was closed, in his cases, by the quality of the evidence. Most days he believed that without effort. Today, the woman in the 3rd row was taking notes on a small yellow pad and watching him. She raised her hand. The transfers to the shell companies. Do we have something that ties Mr. Quell directly? His signature on incorporation documents? Direct account control? Something concrete? OMEN measured his response. The incorporation documents list nominees, registered agents without operational control. The connection to Mr. Quell runs through financial patterns and wire intercepts that reference the accounts. So not his name on the paperwork. Correct. She wrote something down. The patterns are specific, he added. The timing of the deposits corresponds to events documented in the wire intercepts. The amounts correspond to sums referenced in recorded conversations. The circumstantial evidence is substantial. She nodded. OMEN appreciated her in a way he couldn't entirely afford. She was doing what the process rarely demanded of this room, applying friction, asking for the distance between corresponds to and proves. That distance was something he'd been thinking about all morning, in different language, with Kane. The process was consistent, at least. The gaps appeared everywhere you looked, honestly. He answered the next question and moved on. He ate lunch at his desk, a sandwich he made at home and carried in a paper bag because the options near the office got expensive in ways that reminded him, periodically, of the 2 offers he declined. Both times, the number had been significant. Both times, he declined without agonizing. His wife Danielle hadn't been surprised. "You'd be miserable," she said after the second offer. He required the work, not the conviction rate, though the rate mattered to the offers and therefore to him. The work itself, the assembly, the discipline of arranging facts into a shape that could bear weight of an argument, the moment a case cohered. He understood that this was not uncomplicated. The satisfaction of assembly wasn't attached to the person at the center of the case. It was attached to the craft. And the craft, divorced from the humanity it was operating on, was morally incomplete. He knew this. He kept a photograph to remember this. He was sometimes not certain whether the photograph was doing its work or whether it had become a ritual that substituted for the actual reckoning it was supposed to prompt. He watched colleagues perform accountability without ever actually adjusting anything. He promised himself early that he wouldn't do that. He ate his sandwich and sat with the uncertainty of whether he was keeping that promise. Kane came back in the afternoon and placed a printout on the desk. Third unresolved number from the cell tower data, pinged twice within 200 meters of the location between 47 and 1012. Registered to a prepaid, but the prepaid was activated on a number that appears 3 times in the wire from the prior month. OMEN looked at the printout. Whose wire? Quell's secondary line. Kane tapped the page. He activated the prepaid, used it twice that night, then it went dark, never surfaced again. OMEN read the dates. Then he read the timestamps. Activation, 11:42 p.m. The shooting, 10:57 p.m. He pulled the legal pad toward him. Activated after incident. He stared at the sentence for a moment, then drew a single line through it. Activation didn't mean purchase. Purchase could have been earlier. The activation delayed. Carrier lag between registration and first ping was documented. Post-incident activation still implied consciousness of guilt. People preparing for enforcement sometimes activated after the fact to create distance, to establish a clean number for communications that followed. That was consistent with premeditation. That was consistent with a man who understood exposure. It still fits. He didn't say that out loud. If it was activated after, Kane said, doesn't that complicate the premeditation argument? It narrows the window, OMEN replied. It doesn't eliminate intent. Kane looked at him. Then he nodded. After he left, OMEN pulled the legal pad toward him and began drafting the summary memo. He wrote the prepaid section carefully. The prepaid device associated with the defendant was activated in temporal proximity to the incident and utilized within the geographic perimeter of the location during the relevant window. He read it back. Temporal proximity. Not prior to, not after. Proximity, which was accurate, which contained the facts without resolving them in either direction, which was the kind of language that could bear weight in a brief without requiring him to address what the timestamp said to him in the 30 seconds before he decided what it meant. He moved on to the next section. Later, before he left, he opened the bottom drawer. Patricia Reyes, East Harlem, October 2009. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. Long enough to have looked, not long enough for anything to shift. He wondered whether she would care about activation stamps. He closed the drawer before the thought finished forming. He put on his coat. He went home. Across town, Zaire was awake. He was thinking about a rooftop 3 years ago, September, the city absorbing the last of the light. The roof was still warm under his palms, concrete pressing into his skin when he leaned back. Sin next to him, the money still small, the future still feeling like a room with enough space in it. He hadn't known that night that OMEN Kells existed, that a man 15 years into learning how the game worked was building a vocabulary that would eventually describe him. That was somewhere in the federal building, words were being chosen, ongoing, continuing, unit, authorized, that would arrive in an envelope years later and turn everything that had been fluid into something fixed. They'd been moving toward each other without knowing it. Now they were in the same file, and the file wasn't done being written.